Unbelievable. My children called police at my own wedding. I never thought I'd find myself standing before the altar again at 65. When you bury the woman you've shared 40 years with, it feels as though your heart is being lowered into the ground alongside her. But life is cunning. It doesn't ask if you're ready to feel again. It simply places someone in your path who, unexpectedly, returns to you the taste of a morning, a cup of coffee, the sound of evening conversation. For me, that woman was Evelyn. Evelyn was 10 years my junior, but her eyes held just as much weariness and loss as mine. She had survived the death of a husband, a long illness, solitary evenings spent by the window. We met by chance in the library. I was searching for an old book on gardening, and she was holding a novel about lost years. We started talking, then met again, and suddenly it seemed that two broken hearts could, together, form something whole. And so this day had come. My wedding day. Since morning, the house had smelled of fresh roses and bread. The neighbors had brought loaves as if wanting to add a little warmth to our celebration. I looked at myself in the mirror, gray hair, wrinkles, hands no longer as steady as they once were. And yet, they were the hands of a man who had lived a life and had earned the right to a little happiness at the end of it. I knew the children would come. Tom and Laura, my pride and at the same time my sorrow. Tom had become a lawyer, Laura a teacher. I was proud of them, though after their mother's death, a chill had settled over our relationship. I thought they had come to support me. If not with joy, then with reserve, but with respect all the same. When I saw them at the entrance to the hall, my heart faltered. They were dressed for the occasion as was fitting. Tom in a severe suit, Laura in an understated dress. But their faces were stone. There was no warmth in their gazes. There was something else there, wariness, a coldness, and I would even say condemnation. "Dad," said Tom, and his voice held the same quality as his eyes. The words sounded like a formality, not an endearment. "Congratulations," Laura added, barely touching my hand as if afraid to make contact for longer. The guests around us smiled, clapped me on the shoulder, offered words of encouragement. But I saw only the two of them. And the longer I looked, the more I understood. They had not come to share my joy. Some might say I was imagining it, that old eyes are prone to seeing threats where none exist. But believe me, when you have raised children, you can read them without words. And what I saw in that moment was as clear as sunlight. They had not come to congratulate me, they had come to fight. I smiled, though everything inside me clenched. "I'm glad you came. It means a great deal to me." They said nothing. Laura turned away toward the hall. Tom adjusted his tie and sat down as if this were a courtroom, not a wedding. It was then that I felt the first faint tremor. The day that was meant to be the happiest had suddenly begun to smell of trouble. The reception hall was filled with the glow of lamps and the soft murmur of guests. Light music played in the corner. Waiters moved quietly between the tables, setting down glasses and bringing out dishes. I sat at the table, holding a glass of champagne, and tried to smile. My heart trembled slightly, not with joy but with a deep-seated foreboding. Tom stood up. His hands were shaking a little, though he tried to appear confident. All the guests turned. Old friends, neighbors, even the pastor who had performed our brief ceremony looked on with expectation. "Enjoy it while you can, Dad," he said with a slight sneer that felt more like a challenge. "Because you won't have money left for long." A silence stretched through the hall, taut as a wire. In that moment, it seemed even the music had died away. People didn't know how to react. Some winced, others glanced over at Evelyn, and I saw the fear in her eyes. My hands tightened around the glass. My throat went dry and something sharp twisted in my chest. I understood, this was no mere joke. It was an attempt at public humiliation. My own flesh and blood was telling me, "You're old, you're naive, your new life is a fraud." I took a deep breath and raised my glass, forcing a smile that I hoped hid the hurt. "Thank you, Tom," I said calmly, though inside I was burning. "I appreciate your honesty." My words sent a slight shock through the guests. Evelyn squeezed my hand but said nothing. I saw tears welling in her eyes and my own pain deepened. "What does he mean?" I heard one of the neighbors whisper. "I think he's talking about inheritance," someone else replied. I knew Tom wanted more than just to voice his displeasure. He wanted to show everyone, "See, he's making a mistake, he's giving his heart to a stranger, and soon the money will be gone." My heart constricted. I remembered years of work, years of caring for the children, the house, the family. All those sleepless nights so they could study, grow, be happy. And now, such betrayal in my own home at my own wedding. I felt anger. But it was a quiet, cold, contained anger. Not the kind that shouts and destroys, but the kind that plans, that waits for its moment. You seem worried, Tom said as if taunting me. Don't tell me you've lost sleep thinking about it? I smiled again, but this smile held something else entirely, a calm resolve. Sleep comes easily, my son, I answered quietly. More easily than when one spends nights scheming against their own family. Laura pressed her lips together, her face pale, and I knew the blow had struck true. She knew I was talking about them. The guests began exchanging glances. Some smiled nervously, others tried to intervene, but I raised a hand, stopping the conversation. Let's not spoil the evening. Tonight is a celebration. My life. My happiness. At that moment, the waiters brought out the cake. Everyone was distracted by the candles, but inside I was seething. I sat watching my children, trying to read their eyes, to understand how far they were willing to go. Dad, you're making a mistake, Tom interjected again. She's not like us. She just wants your money. I felt a heat rise beneath my skin, but outwardly I remained calm. It was like a game of chess. Every move controlled, every step calculated. And what will you do if I do? I said softly, almost a whisper. Take everything? Then what? Break your own family apart? Laura said nothing. Tom was taken aback. I could see the tension growing among the guests, could feel them realizing that something larger than a simple argument was unfolding. The first drops of rain began to tap against the hall's windows, a tiny symbol that the celebration would never be the same again. And I understood, this evening had changed forever. Not because I was afraid, but because truth and justice had to be served, even if it was painful. Inside me was a mix of hurt, anxiety, and a strange relief. Hurt from my children's words, anxiety over the potential scandal, relief that it was all now out in the open, no longer hidden behind smiles and politeness. I took another sip of champagne, trying to taste the celebration, but even the sweet, bubbly liquid seemed bitter. Everything was clear. The wedding had become an arena not only for love, but for a struggle, and I was prepared to meet it honestly. And it was in that moment I understood I would act carefully but decisively. Because happiness is not just joy, it is also the ability to defend yourself, even when the betrayal comes from those you love the most. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my composure. A faint anxiety was palpable among the guests. Many were whispering, some attempted to smile, but tension hung in the air like a thick fog. This is my life, my choice. You are still my heirs, nothing has changed, I said, striving to keep my voice level. Tom looked at me with surprise, then smirked. Dad, stop it. You're just deceiving yourself, he said coldly. We can see you're giving all your money to this woman. You're blind to reality. Laura nodded, her eyes turning almost green with fury. Yes, father, you don't even realize she's playing you, she added, raising her voice so everyone could hear. And we won't let you leave us with nothing. I felt a hot wave rise in my chest. But outwardly, I maintained a calm expression. The smile was a mask I had learned to wear in my youth, when dealing with difficult people. Children, please calm down, I said quietly. Today is a day for joy, not accusations. But they would not be calmed. Tom rose from his chair and stepped toward the table as if to seize the upper hand. His fingers clenched his glass like a fist. We will not be silent. You're giving everything to this woman, he exclaimed. You're giving away your life and with it our rights. Laura let out a loud laugh. But it was a cold, sarcastic laugh, almost jarring to the ear. Listen, father, we're just looking out for your interests. You're harming yourself, she said, looking down on me. A shiver ran down my spine. The guests began exchanging glances. Some clenched their fists, others looked away. Everyone sensed this was no longer a mere conversation, but a public confrontation. I tried to hold my ground, speaking calmly, repeating words that felt like a shield. Believe me, I know what I'm doing. Evelyn is an honest woman. She would never take anything that rightfully belongs to my children. But Tom and Laura weren't listening. They began holding up their phones, displaying what they claimed were photos of documents, agreements, even a scan of a will, forged. I knew instantly. Look, father, this is all the proof. We're calling the police, said Tom, and I felt the entire room freeze. I looked at Evelyn. She squeezed my hand, her fingers trembling. The guests held their breath. Some began whispering frantically, others nearly leapt from their chairs. What are you doing? I asked quietly, feeling a battle rage inside me between anger and cold reason. This is a wedding, not a courtroom. She's deceived you, father. She'll take your money? Laura shouted. We won't allow it. And then Tom did the thing I least expected. He took out his phone and began calling the police right there at the celebration table. Police, hello. We'd like to report a fraud. His voice was loud, clear, and every guest heard those words. I felt a strange mix of pain and shock. My heart pounded, my chest tightened, but my mind worked with a cold clarity. They thought they could frighten me, ruin the celebration, force me to back down. They didn't know I was already prepared for this, that I had anticipated their moves and taken steps to avoid the trap. The guests began whispering about who was right, who was to blame. Some came to me with support, others with condemnation, for from the outside it must have looked like an old man falling into a swindler's hands. Evelyn looked into my eyes. I saw the same resolve there that I felt. We would not let them destroy what we had built together. "Children, you have ruined this celebration," I said quietly, but with a force that made the words land like a blow. "You have shown everyone who you truly are. And that is not my fault." The first sirens sounded from the street, and the atmosphere in the hall grew even more tense. I sat at the table, clutching my glass, and understood. The celebration had now become an arena where I would have to defend not only my happiness but my honor. Inside me was a mixture of hurt, anger, and a strange calm. I knew one thing: this was not the end. And though my heart ached from the betrayal, my mind was already constructing a plan to escape this trap with my dignity intact. I looked at Evelyn and said quietly to myself, "We will get through this. And the truth will be on our side." The guests, the police, my children, all became part of a tense silence. And in that moment, I understood that the worst was yet to come, but I had the strength to meet it head-on. The sirens outside sounded muffled, like an echo of some distant alarm that had now rippled through the entire hall. The guests sat frozen, exchanging tense glances. A few tried to whisper, but even their hushed voices seemed loud against the backdrop of what was unfolding. I felt a knot tightening in my chest. The hurt was impossible to hide. My anger was clenched behind my teeth, but above all was the feeling of betrayal by my own children. My flesh and blood, the ones I had raised, fed, taught, loved, were now publicly humiliating me at my own celebration. "Dad, you still don't understand. She just wants your money," Laura shouted, as if trying to drown out the music, the guests, and her own gnawing conscience. "Yes, you're blind to reality." Tom joined in. His voice was sharp, like the strike of a hammer on an anvil. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. My heart was pounding wildly, but my mind was working with cold precision. A month ago I had understood. If something went wrong, if they tried to interfere or insult my choice, they would have to pay. And I had done everything to be ready for this moment. My inner self whispered, "This is your moment. Don't lose your composure. Show them who is in charge here." I opened my eyes. In my hands I clutched an envelope of documents I had kept close for a full month. Inside was the real, notarized will, rewritten so that any attempt to manipulate my final wishes would backfire on the children. "Stop," I said, rising slowly from my seat, bringing the room to silence. Every guest turned to me. "I think this charade has gone far enough." Tom and Laura bared their teeth, ready to argue, but I raised my hand, and the entire hall fell still. "These signatures are forgeries," I said, holding the envelope before them. "This is the real notarized will. And as of this moment, you are no longer my heirs." A silence fell over the room. 1 second, 2, 3, and everyone understood that something extraordinary had just happened. The police officer standing nearby furrowed his brow, looking from the envelope to us. "Are you serious?" he asked quietly. I nodded. Inside I was swirling with relief and a hidden joy. Joy that justice had finally been served, even if it was a bitter victory. My children, who had once been my heart, now stood before me as enemies. Tom tried to say something, but the words caught in his throat. Laura clenched her fists, her eyes filling with tears, but they were tears of rage, not remorse. You deceived us," Laura said, her voice trembling but full of anger. I looked at them calmly, without malice, without shouting. Only cold resolve. "No, children. I was simply protecting myself and my life. I loved you and everything I did was for your security. But you chose to betray me publicly. The consequences of your actions are on you." Evelyn came to my side, took my hand and squeezed it. Her eyes shone with gratitude and warmth. We were together on this battlefield and I felt we had won the first battle. The guests began whispering among themselves, discussing what had just happened. Some applauded quietly, others lowered their eyes in embarrassment for my children. The atmosphere had shifted. Now it was not the wedding at the forefront, but justice that had prevailed. The police officer carefully placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. "If this is a notarized document, there are no grounds for any claims against your family." Tom lowered his gaze, and I could see the realization of his defeat settling in. Laura, her hands still clenched, took a step back as if her anger had melted away, giving room to bitterness. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension that had gripped my chest all evening slowly begin to release. My heart was still beating fast, but a calm strength now resided within me. "Today is the day of my happiness," I said quietly, yet so all could hear. "And if anyone thinks they can spoil it, let them know. Justice is on my side." Evelyn smiled at me, her eyes glistening with tears. The guests broke into quiet applause, and for the first time that evening, I felt that the celebration was truly continuing. But deep inside I knew, this moment was more than just a victory. It was a lesson for everyone. You cannot play with another's happiness or betray those who love you. And it was in that moment I understood that happiness and justice can walk hand in hand. I had loved faithfully, waited patiently, acted wisely. And now, the victory was mine. The silence that fell after my announcement about the real will was almost tangible. The guests sat with their mouths agape, some whispered among themselves, while others seemed afraid to make the slightest sound. Tom and Laura stood as if rooted to the spot, their eyes shooting daggers of rage and horror. In that moment I felt it was time to take the next step. I slowly raised my eyes to the assembled guests and said, "I think it's time to show you one more thing." The guests exchanged glances, a faint anxiety hung in the air. Tom tensed as if sensing the worst. I nodded to the notary, who had been sitting quietly in a corner of the hall, almost unnoticed among the guests. "Mr. Collins, would you confirm that these signatures are genuine?" I said, addressing him loudly and confidently. The notary, an elegant middle-aged man, stood up, adjusted his glasses and walked toward me. His gaze was steady, professional, but with the faintest hint of a smile. He was clearly enjoying the moment. "Yes, Mr." he began, and I saw beads of sweat form on Tom and Laura's foreheads. "I personally notarized the genuine will and can confirm that all the documents presented by your children are forgeries." The notary's words landed like a thunderclap. The children paled. Tom tried to object but could barely muster a whisper. "And no, that's impossible." Laura stood with clenched fists, her eyes filled with panic. In that moment, I knew our plan had worked. The children who had tried to manipulate me and forge signatures, now found themselves facing the threat of criminal charges. "Do you understand the consequences of your actions?" the notary said quietly. "Forgery of signatures is a criminal offense. I will be obliged to notify the authorities if this is confirmed." Tom and Laura exchanged glances. Tom's face was twisted with a mixture of terror and anger. Laura remained silent, as if searching for an excuse that did not exist. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly release. Inside I felt a mix of triumph, relief, and a touch of irony. Who would have thought they would trap themselves? Evelyn gently placed a hand on my shoulder, and I smiled at her. She understood that this victory had been achieved not through force or shouting, but through cold calculation and wisdom. "Well then," I said softly, addressing the guests. "It's time to return this celebration to what it was meant to be." The music began to play again, light and gentle, as if trying to soften the shock, and I offered Evelyn my arm. "Shall we dance?" She smiled, her eyes shining with happiness and relief. I took her hand and we stepped onto the dance floor. The guests began to applaud. Someone whistled softly, and in most eyes I saw joy and relief. This was our moment. A moment of triumph for justice and for a love that even the closest of betrayers could not destroy. And the children? Tom and Laura quietly slipped out of the hall. Their steps were heavy, their faces flushed with shame and anger. It seemed they finally understood the folly and dishonor of their actions, but it was too late to change anything. I looked around the hall at the smiling guests, at Evelyn's radiant face, and felt an extraordinary sense of relief. Inside I felt victory, ironic, calm, and complete. I hadn't shouted, hadn't humiliated, hadn't broken. I had simply acted with reason and heart. "There, my dear," I said, looking at Evelyn, "sometimes happiness comes not through force, but through patience and wisdom." We spun across the dance floor, and the hall around us once again filled with laughter and joy. And even when I caught a glimpse of the children leaving empty-handed, I felt a strange relief. Justice had prevailed. Yes, the evening had been dramatic, almost like a battle, but the ending was ironic. The children had trapped themselves, the truth had won, and Evelyn and I had received what made it all worthwhile, happiness and peace that no one could ever take from us. The sirens outside fell silent, the music played on, and I understood. Sometimes life surprises you in such a way that even in tragedy, there is room for a smile and a touch of irony. Evelyn and I stood on the terrace, where a soft evening breeze stirred the strings of lights, their reflections shimmering in our champagne glasses. Below, the guests were gradually dispersing, discussing the evening's events. Some approached us quietly to offer their congratulations. Others, who had witnessed the scandal firsthand, simply shook their heads as if trying to make sense of the entire evening. I looked at Evelyn, at her smile, and for the first time in many years, I felt I could breathe easily. There was no more anxiety or resentment inside me, only a quiet sense of victory and deep satisfaction. We had endured shock, humiliation, a public scandal, and emerged with our honor and dignity intact. "I never thought it would end like this," Evelyn said, her arm around my waist. "You showed incredible composure." I smiled, feeling the warmth of her touch. "Life can be cruel," I said softly, "but sometimes it offers remarkable lessons. Today we proved that happiness can be defended with reason, not force." Down below, I noticed Tom and Laura quietly leaving the hall. They walked slowly, heads bowed, their eyes burning with a mixture of anger and shame. It was clear to me now, there would be no more connection between us. They had made their choice, and the consequences of their actions were now set. Yet a faint chill of anxiety still traced its way down my spine. I understood. Life is unpredictable. Sometimes children return, as supplicants, with pleas, apologies, or even attempts to interfere again. But now I was ready. I was no longer an old man who could be frightened or humiliated. "Do you think they'll come back?" Evelyn asked with a slight sigh. I gazed into the distance where the city lights flickered and slowly smiled. "Perhaps. But if they do, it won't be with threats. They'll come with the understanding that now I am the one who decides. And if they return, I will be ready. This time on my terms." We embraced again, and in that moment, I felt the weight of the day lift from my shoulders. My heart no longer clenched with anxiety or hurt. We stood on the terrace, listening to the gentle hum of the city mingling with the distant laughter of guests, and there was something almost magical in the air, a sense of justice that could not be taken away. I looked at Evelyn and said quietly to myself, "This isn't the end. It's a new beginning. And I know that from now on, everything will be truly honest." Even the faint possibility of the children's return no longer frightened me. On the contrary, I knew that now I was the master of my life, my love, my happiness. With a smile and a touch of irony, I took Evelyn's hand, and we made our way back to the dance floor, where music was once again filling the hall with joy. The guests' looks were full of sympathy, respect, and admiration. And in that moment I understood. Sometimes even from pain and betrayal, true victory is born. Yes, my children might return. But now I was prepared to meet them not with pity or fear, but with firm, calm certainty. I decide who is in my life and on what terms. The wind gently swayed the strings of lights, the city glimmered, the music played, and for the first time in a long while, I felt everything around me falling into harmony. Not perfect, not free of the past, but real. And it was in that moment I understood. My life with Evelyn was only just beginning, and no betrayals from the past could ever destroy it.